With the first couple of BCSs concluded and creating a very worrisome picture for Vanguard, and with no ban list for the international side in sight, we need to address the issue at hand. Stand up, Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another video, and today we are going to address some worrisome sign that we see arising from these results, because last weekend or this weekend we saw the conclusion of the German BCS as well as Rosemont for USA, and 2 weeks ago we also saw the conclusion of the BCS in Duluth. Some of these results we were expecting them to some extent, looking mainly at Premium, but V Premium and Standard are a bit of a different story, because most players, if you were talking about V Premium, were probably thinking Gurgwit and all the other big names out of the new clan collection stuff, making names for themselves, even Dark Regulars for example. But some players behind the scene, myself included, were brewing or thinking about another deck that will probably take the format by storm to some extent, but it didn't in the amount of success that it did. Wasn't something I foresaw myself, and I'm mainly talking about Steam Maiden taking all the names and all the formats, or should I say all the tournaments, but more on that once we dive into every single format. So that is one thing that is a worrisome signal. And for Standard overall is a relatively good format or in good spots, but there might be some specific things that we need to look out for and potentially address if Bushiroad feels like they need to address that. But that's basically the idea of what I want to talk about in this video, because in this video I want to go over the different formats, see what the results were, and if there are some problematic things that arise with this information, and what Bushiroad should do with the upcoming English ban list. Should they just mimic the Japanese one, or should they add some extra things on top of it, aka the page 2 for Standard, V Premium, Premium, to fix certain things that they might have overlooked with the Japanese one. So Standard is actually a relatively diverse format, and that has been the case for the last couple of set waves so far, but this trend continues into this BCS, because if we take a look at the top spots for these tournaments, we see that Gravidia is taking the most spots with 6 tops. Then beyond that we have Flagberg as well as Nirvana taking 3 spots, Kyrie and Basraga as well as Tagria are all taking 2 spots in top 8, and then all the other decks, Prison, Magnolia, Bruce, Orphis, Greedon and Learner will all take a single spot for top 8. So as you can see, there's actually quite diverse, and even if we take a look at the top 4 and the ones that actually won a tournament, it's actually not a singular deck that's constantly making names here. The only thing that's consistent, which is kind of weird, is the third place spot being Gravidia every single time so far, which is a bit weird seeing a consistent third place deck. So with that said, you can say Standard is probably good where it is, and they don't need to hit anything as we've seen with the ban list so far. However, there's one deck that stands out of the rest, and that's of course Gravidia, because if we take a look at the combined tops, Gravidia is the #1 deck here with 6 spots. I don't think there's any worrisome sign, and they need to address something. So if there's one deck you might want to look out for, it's maybe that one that you want to keep on your radar, but I don't think it is any deck that you need to worry about. But if they want to address anything about Gravidia, maybe address the Shed Army token, that maybe they cannot use that order, so they cannot create the early aggro that the deck is known for these days, and that's the reason why it's so consistent to what it can do. Maybe they can remove that element from the deck, and then we'll make the deck a lot more fair, maybe even go 1 tier below, but I don't think they have to do it right now. But if they need to do something, maybe that's a thing. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You thought maybe I would do V Premium before Premium, but I'm gonna leave that for last for obvious reasons. Now, for Premium, if we take a look at the top spots, it's basically what we expect, and it's a story that continues from the voices of the community, as well as from what we saw at the end of the BCF and BRO season, because from the top 8 spots, we see a total of 10 going to Narukami, from which 2 are Vanquishers and 8 are Eradicators. We see 4 being of Aquaforce Ripples. Then we have 5 Gear Chronicle decks, and interesting enough, one of those is a Steam Maiden deck. And yes, Steam Maiden Premium is a legit option. It's something I've been personally brewing for over a year now, and with the latest support just coming out with Clan Collection, the deck is actually a legit option. But I'm going to talk about that in a future video. Now, follow up these big 3 decks in the format. We have 2 tops for Link Jokers and 2 tops for Dark Regulars, and the last 2 spots go to 1 Gold Paladin and 1 Spike Brothers. So It's not as diverse as we see with Standard, and that's for obvious reasons, because we have 2 problematic decks and one other deck that's also something that people have been talking about for quite a while, and people are hoping that it gets banned to some extent. But let's first address the obvious elephant in the room: Aqua Force and Gear Chronicle. Yes, we need to get the same bans. That's very obvious. Everybody knows this is nothing and anything special. They need to ban Mystery Flare Dragon, and they need to ban Odysseus to just nip the butts of these decks, just remove them from the format. They're toxic decks that create toxic environments, and it just shouldn't be anywhere near the game. That's very obvious. But the interesting thing here is that if we combine the top numbers of these 2 problematic decks, and we remove the Steam Beta one, of course, we have 8 tops. Yet that is lower than the total amount tops that Narukami has. It's equal to the Eradicator tops, but then we have 2 Vanquisher tops on top of that. Which is weird if you think about it, because if those 2 decks were so problematic and oppressive, why do they not combined have more tops than another deck? And I think the answer for that question is honestly a lot more straightforward than it is. And the reason why it is because of 2 reasons. One, Narukami in itself is an insanely strong deck because of their cracked G-Zone. Narukami G-Zone is cracked beyond belief. But the second reason is that Narukami honestly has a really good matchup against these 2 oppressive decks. It can effectively really well play into Ripples and into Mystery Flare Dragon for multiple reasons, but actually they are the same reason if you think about it. And that's because they can capitalize on the game plan of both decks. Does that mean Eradicators also needs to get a ban or a restriction just like Mystery Flare Dragon and Ripples? Depending on who you ask, the answer is either yes or no. I think I'm in the middle in this one because I don't think they should get a ban. I don't think they should like ban Stunfers or whatnot or anything. I think that's a bit too harsh. I think they probably just slap the deck on the wrist a bit to make it a bit more lower, to fall in line with other decks, to make the format a bit more reasonable and just give other decks a bit more breathing room. Because even though Narukami plays very well in these top 2 decks, they also play very well in almost every deck out there in the format, or in the game, essentially. And what I think they should do is either one of 2 things. Either just limit Stunfers to 1 copy, thus forcing the Narukami player to think about when to go into Stunfers, because just first stride Stunfers and then second stride Stunfers again is ridiculous. The first one is completely fine, the second one is where things get a bit ridiculous, and forcing the Narukami player to make choices of what they're gonna do for the first stride, because do you want to go in stun first but then waste the late game potential stun first, or do you go into a weaker first stride but then save yourself the option to have a finisher in the form of a stun first the following subsequent turn? But the other option they can do is to choice restrict stun first with Exterminate Dragon, thus removing the whole you cannot play around the deck anymore, also as a gameplay feature of the deck. They can go either route. I'm personally more in favor of just saying stun first to 1, but depending on what Bushiroad thinks is more healthier, they can go different directions, as you can also just limit stun first with a specific grade 3 boss unit. But I think that's just chasing the issue at hand, because it means the moment they create another grade 3 boss unit that's ridiculous, then they have to choice restrict that as well, and it just is an endless cycle at that point. Now, beyond that, I think they should just leave the format as is, because I think just trying to balance everything, even though you don't know what's going to be top tier, is a bit overbearing. And I think if they just address Mischief Flare, Ripples, and to some extent Narukami, they should just let the format play out and see if there's anything oppressive arising from the power gap that now needs to be filled. And honestly, I think there's also a fun environment for players to figure out what the best deck in the format is. The only thing that I would probably add on top of that is to just revert the Nymerdol restriction, because that thing with the Harry Strike doesn't make any sense, and then just say hard ones per turn on Alice. Yes, players have been saying ban Genie, ban Leslie or whatnot. I am honestly of the opinion that does absolutely nothing, because as Nightmare players or even Pale Moon players have been showing me so far, is that it actually doesn't do anything. They have other options to just use a different loop and get the same result as easily as possible, and you just move from one issue to another and you did nothing, essentially. The main solution I see is just hard ones per turn on Alice. You fix the entire solution. There's no loop going on anymore, and it doesn't cripple the clan as a whole because they have so many other options to just keep looping over and over again. They don't have a one card loop over and over again accessible for every build imaginable. I think that's probably the best solution, and just remove the Harry Stride restriction because they literally killed the deck for no reason. It just doesn't make any sense. But oh boy, do we get into an exciting one now. V Premium. Oh, how has everybody been wrong about what the actual best deck in the format was going to be after this set? Everybody was thinking Gurgrid is going to run Supreme with, of course, the new Holy Shine Dragon in combination with Percival and all the other shenanigans that is going to rise from this set, as well as a couple of other decks that looked very insane on paper, like Luard. People were thinking Luard is going to destroy the format with the new Idiona card, even though a lot of players were already seeing the deck is not going to do anything because of the whole choice restriction, removing the counter charge engine of the deck, because you could just damage deny the deck and it doesn't really do as much. Now, the main thing, as we can see here, if we look at the top cuts, there is a complete different problem arising from here. Because if we take a look at the top spots, we see that a total of 13 spots of the 24 go to Gear Chronicles Steam Maiden. That's more than 50% of the top cuts going to one deck. Then the next best decks are Dark Regulars, Narukami, and Gold Paladin, each taking 2 spots. And then we have 1 spot for Great Nature, Royal Paladin, Bermuda Triangle, Aqua Force, and Grand Blue. That's a very worrisome picture. And on first glance, you might think to yourself, maybe this isn't necessarily a problem. Like 6 out of 8 tops for Steam Maiden in Germany, as well as 5 out of 8 for Rosemont. You can potentially justify the numbers if the same amount of percentage of players were playing it in a tournament as the amount of percentage playing it in Top Cut. So about 75, between 75 and 50% players playing Steam Maiden for the entire tournament. I can tell you now, that's not the case. There were way less Steam Maiden players in the tournament. I think in Germany, it wasn't even like 10 players in a 52-ish. I don't know how many players there were. I know Premium were like 52. I think V Premium is a bit more. But from what I've heard from the ground, it's like not even in double digits. The amount of players at tops is insane. I don't know the correct wording for it because I'm very bad with this, but the playthrough rate of Steam Maiden is beyond reasonable here, and there are multiple reasons to that be the case here. And of course, that means this format has a serious singular problem, because I don't think this is a tier 1 situation. We are closely heading towards a tier 0 format at this point. Now, Steam Maiden isn't uncontested. There are some decks that can play really well in Steam Maiden that's really interesting. Ghosties, for example, is a deck that can actually play very well into Steam Maidens, but that doesn't result in the fact that Steam Maiden isn't the problem. Steam Maiden is most definitely a problem. How can we address this? There are 3 main things that people are talking about what makes Steam Maiden so strong, and to some extent you can say unfair. One is their plus engine. They have the new Grade 2 and a new Gear Cat that can potentially go +3. Because the Grade 2 superior goes to Cat, the Grade 2 has an on at the end of battle skill to check top 2 to bind 1 and add 1 to hand, so that's another +1. And then the Gear Cat on place can check top 3 to search a Steam Maiden and add it to hand. So combining those skills together is essentially a +3 for a Counterblast and a Soulless. Now, I'm going to be realistic. It's not as reasonable to just say it's always going to be a +3 from the Grade 2. Because it's very reasonable to also assume the Gear Cat won't give you the +1 for free, because the Gear Cat can definitely miss, and I've seen my own experience, and I've felt it many times, where you check top 3 and there's no Steam Maiden in there. It's just the Grade 4, your triggers, or your non-Steam Maiden cards you're playing. So it's not a clear-cut +3. It is a clear-cut +2, with the chance of getting an extra plus on top of that. A +2 for a Counterblast and a Soul Blast, in my opinion, is honestly not the problem here. Then the second thing that people are pointing out is the multi-attack engine and the fact that you can achieve 5 attacks for 0 counterblast. And the way how it works is that if you have the grade 0 Uluru, you can go the Uluru into a grade 1, thus getting a counter charge of the grade 3, and then turn the grade 1 into a grade 2 for a counterblast, but that counterblast you just got back from the counter charge, thus achieving those 2 extra attacks without actually paying a counterblast, and then you still have 3 other attacks. So that is 5 attacks, and then you can extend that potentially more for every counterblast and potential combo piece you have access to achieve even more attacks. Now, yes, that is really, really strong when you get the pieces, but that is still in the prospect that you need the pieces. This is very similar to, in my opinion, how Timely functions during the Jira. It's insanely strong when you get the cards, but you are reliant on the cards. The only upside this engine has is that, just like Timely, it's very flexible, that even if you don't have your main combos, you have other options to at least get some value. It's not the ideal value, but you get some value. But even then, I don't think that's the issue that we have at hand here. Then we get to the third part. And this is where things, in my opinion, I completely agree with everybody, and this is where the deck gets from good to busted. And that's the added guard restrict on top of it. Thanks to this card, Gear Colossus or Metal Mutant the Colossus, you can give every attack the Battle Door guard restrict. And this is where we get into a situation where things are problematic. Because you do not, and I mean you do not, want to have a turn-wide guard restrict on a deck that can multi-attack and can achieve numbers as well on top of that. And that's where I feel like, after these results, once they announce the English ban list, they do not only have to ban Mystery Flood Dragon for premium, ban Odysseus for Ripple, potentially do something about Origami, but they also have to ban this card for V premium, because this card is problematic. But while we are at this, I think they should not stop at this card. They should ban every turn-wide indiscriminate guard restrict from the format, which includes cards like Hope on Damp, and there are a couple of others that I don't remember off the top of my head, but cards like Hope on Damp, this card, and a couple of other cards just need to go. They do not belong in this game anymore. They create very unfair, unfun situations, and they can easily break decks beyond belief, because turn-wide guard restricts are just a problematic issue, just waiting to be disastrous. Now, of course, there are some other things they need to address, and that's one thing I want to say for the end of the video, because I haven't addressed it so far. Overtriggers. Yes, we have been over this discussion many times before. You've heard other content creators talk about this as well. I'm not going to make this any longer than it needs to be. They just need to remove these cards from the format. And I'm not talking about premium, I'm also talking about standard. And I know people are saying, well, you cannot remove it from standard because of X and Y reasons, because it's, again, the main selling point. I'm not talking about banning it worldwide. Just keep the Overtriggers in Japan, because I know the issues that arise. Premium, it needs to go, and even you can remove from premium from Japan. You can keep the standard Overtriggers in Japan, but I think you should still at this point remove it from standard as well, because we get to the point it's also going to be problematic in standard. And the arguments to be made that the reason why you cannot remove it from standard because of how stores work in Japan, and what we saw happen with the main, where stores got basically screwed over by the restriction list. They bought in all these cards, they lose the way to sell these cards, and then they stop supporting the game. This doesn't actually apply as much in the Western side of things, at least from my experience, because not a lot of stores actually buy in singles or open up product to sell singles. They just buy the product to sell the product, and the secondary market is mainly player-to-player base. So we don't care if the cards get banned, because then, oh no, we lose monetary value. No, we want the card banned so we can actually play a fun game and get this situation fixed. So I think ban premium absolutely just across the board, and if you cannot justify banning it in standard because of Japanese reasons, at the least look at the side to just ban it in the English format. We have a different ban list. You've shown that you can ban other cards. Why not think about banning it just for the English format? Because we Western players are sick and tired of this card, and I've seen too many people getting very salty and then turn the entire tournament environment just from a very awesome place to then suddenly people just being very negative and down because of another Overtrigger hit, and it's just, that's basically it. It doesn't feel good for nobody, and I don't understand why it's still a thing. and Bushiroad needs to understand the problems these cards have. That little Overtrigger rant out of the way. Overall, if we're gonna get the ban list that they showed for Japan, I think we are a very good format for premium, but they need to do something about V. Even though it hurts my heart to see that both Gear Chronicle decks, we finally are meta relevant again after like 3 years. Remember the video I made a while back, or the link is on there, about the rise and fall of Gear Chronicle. Then suddenly out of nowhere, we rose very high, but I think we flew too high and burned ourselves in the sun, and now we immediately need to go back down. But I think if they address Mystery Flare Dragon, and they address Team Maiden in the way that I think they should, aka ban Colossus, we are actually still the contending top tier spot, or at least tier 1 spot, but with different options. At least not in V. V Premium is still going to be the same deck, but in Premium, we have other options, and with the prospect of the Crest mechanic, there might be more on the horizon. But with that said, that's basically everything I want today. Overall, a bit of a longer, unusual type of video, because what we've seen so far and the community outrage with the current format, I thought we need to address it to some extent, and I hope Bushiroad has been listening along and understand the issues at hand and realize things they can do. They have the opportunity. The ball is now in their court, and they can make the best of it. And if they can make a home run bat or whatever, a perfect serve, they can smash it out of the park. Because there's a possibility they can still save this BCS season and make it one of the best, but they need to act quickly.